With 4 trade agreements and a peace deal under his belt, President Trump continues his tour of Asia. But questions remain over how Washington and Beijing will shore up their pivotal relationship. Does the U.S. still seek to contain China? Or can ASEAN nations strengthen themselves against U.S. dominance? I'm Andrea Sankin. Today's Newsmaker is President Trump in Asia. From peace talks to trade deals, President Trump's attendance at the Kuala Lumpur ASEAN summit and his subsequent stops have left analysts scrambling to understand what's coming. Of the trade agreements signed in Malaysia, 3 couldn't manage to get out of 19% U.S. tariffs, but they did serve to increase U.S. access to crucial minerals. Meanwhile, high-level reps from China and the U.S. met on the sidelines to produce a substantial framework for a deal. But the world will have to wait until Presidents Trump and Xi meet in person later this week for more details. So what did the world get out of this ASEAN summit? And what else could come? Here's a look.
For what is primarily a summit of Southeast Asian nations, the US president's presence loomed large over the ASEAN 2025 summit in Malaysia on Sunday. It proved fertile ground for discussion, with pomp and pageantry thrown into the mix for good measure. A triumph of optics for Trump, who was present at the peace deal signed between Thailand and Cambodia following a 5-day border conflict in July, which saw dozens of people killed and hundreds of thousands of civilians displaced.
But on behalf of the United States, I'm proud to help settle this conflict and forge a future for the region where proud independent nations can prosper and thrive. Safety, security, and peace.
This declaration, if fully implemented, will provide the building blocks for a lasting peace. But more importantly, it will begin the process of mending our ties.
Today marks a historic moment, profound significance for Cambodia and Thailand. A day that reaffirms our shared conviction that peace is always possible.
The Cambodian Prime Minister even nominated the US President for a Nobel Peace Prize in 2026, a tactical bit of flattery diplomacy that has become commonplace in dealing with Trump. The ASEAN bloc consists of some of the world's most trade-dependent economies. Prior US tariffs have cast doubt over several economies in the region, but 4 nations signed trade and critical mineral deals with the US in Kuala Lumpur. Thailand, Malaysia, Vietnam and Cambodia all agreed to remove many wide-ranging trade restrictions and give preferential access to many US products. Previously established high US tariffs would remain on imports to the US, but greater exemptions will be carved out. Thailand, Malaysia and Vietnam will allow greater imports of US vehicles. Thailand in particular also agreed to purchase 80 US aircraft. Thailand and Malaysia each signed separate deals to enhance cooperation and trade of rare earth minerals, as the US seeks to secure supply lines against China's near-global monopoly. Trump departed for Japan on Monday to meet the new Prime Minister, Sanae Takaichi, who is also the country's first woman PM, a conservative who is likely to be very politically warm to Trump. She will seek to emphasize Japan's stance as a greater bulwark against China's influence in the region. Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping are expected to sign a trade agreement in South Korea later this week, after frameworks for trade were discussed in Kuala Lumpur.
Over the past more than a day's time, we have experienced very intense consultations and engaged in constructive exchanges in exploring solutions and arrangements to address these concerns. The 2 sides have reached preliminary consensus on these issues, and next, we are each going to go through our domestic internal approval processes.
Though both countries are remaining tight-lipped, both will want to avoid inflaming any further tariff wars between the 2 powers. ASEAN and a series of high-level conferences across the region have put a spotlight on Asia for the next few days. How the talks, trade agreements, and tariff negotiations play out on the world stage will have lasting effects that will ripple far beyond the Asian continent.
Well, joining me now to look further at ASEAN and Trump's Asia tour are from Kuala Lumpur, former political secretary to former Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak, O. Isun. Also from the Malaysian capital, former diplomat and founder of Diplomatify, Ilango Karupanan. And from Delaware, Professor Emeritus of Public Policy at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, John Rennie Short. Thanks all so much for being with me. Ilango, I'll start with you. First, tell us, how did it go? And was it a first to see such a dominating presence from a non-ASEAN member like this?
Well, I think the summit as a whole went very well indeed. It went like clockwork. But, the reference to Trump as as an outsider, non-ASEAN member, I think, in fact, it's a little bit incorrect because Trump is participating in what is known as the East Asia Summit. This summit is actually the 47th ASEAN Summit plus several related summits. And one of them is the East Asia Summit, in which the United States is a full member, which is why you have the US, you have Australia, New Zealand, India, Japan, Russia, Canada, and South Korea as well participating. But as a whole, I think the summit went perfectly. It couldn't have been better.
Okay, well, let me ask you then quickly, out of the trade agreements signed, did Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, did they get what they wanted? Because they're still facing almost 20% tariffs.
Well, the trade agreements, there are risks and there are wins, of course. The first win is that now there is a clear way out for the countries, not to be in the way of using China as their, way of exporting to America, which would have got them into trouble. So now there is a pathway to, avoiding that. But there are also risks in it. In fact, there are risks because there are several exemptions which the countries have to now negotiate with the U.S. separately as well. It's not a straightforward deal where, it's all done. There are still certain clauses which they have to work through in the course of time. So, which is why I say there are risks and opportunities. Thank you.
Okay, let me ask Isun. As per Malaysia in particular, they were able to achieve zero tariffs on palm oil, on rubber, on cocoa. Plus, there were deals to increase exports of rare earths minerals. It's funny to note that those are some of the most environmentally damaging exports. But still, was it good news, at least for Malaysia?
Oh, yeah, especially from my part of the country, namely the eastern part of Malaysia, the state of Sabah, where we are exporting a lot of palm oil as well as many other agricultural products. Well, this is very much a developing part of the world. If we are talking about environmental preservation, number one, it's certainly not on the priority list of this particular American administration. And number two, I think over the years, because of European demands, I think there have been steps taken to try to make all these productions of, let's say, palm oil to be more environmentally friendly. But I think overall, of course, this particular series of summit, if you take away the Trump factor, I think the biggest achievement would perhaps be the admission of Timor-Leste as the 11th member of ASEAN. Yeah.
Okay. But overall, quickly, Isun, was the Trump factor, as you phrased it, was it welcome overall?
Well, I think it was because it certainly raised the global profile of Malaysia, especially when he did that sort of a jiggle upon descending from Air Force One. I think it was well received. It shows that the United States and Malaysia, with Trump waving the two very similar flags, that indeed we do enjoy very close and very productive bilateral relations, especially in terms of production of electronics, as well as many of those products which are, well, agriculture in nature. I mean, the Americans would need some of our agricultural products, rubber and such. We, on the other hand, would also need to import a lot of, especially foodstuffs, from the United States.
Okay, so John, I mean, if these Asian trade partners are happy, is the United States then succeeding in containing China, as many saw that as the actual longer-term strategy here? Because there were others that would assumed that they would just be forcing stronger alliances and trade among nations of the global South, therefore, you know, backfiring against what Trump had set out to do.
I think it's more of a success for ASEAN countries, I think, because they're able to hedge their position between China and the US to gain as much benefit, especially trade benefits, as possible. I think the problem for American long-term interests is Trump is a one-off. Well, many people hope he's a one-off at the end of this presidency. And so it's difficult to get long-term sustainable trade agreements if the current administration involves kind of personal, transactional, changing policies. So it still leaves America slightly weaker in Southeast Asia. We still haven't confronted China's role in South China Sea. And Southeast Asian countries will be smart. They will not disavow China. China is so important to every country's economy in the region. And they also realize that China is there, quite literally, on their borders for many countries, and will always be there. Whereas the US has been fluctuating in its interest in Southeast Asia. In his first administration, Trump rarely came to Southeast Asia or noted anything about ASEAN agreements or China's activities in the South China Sea. So this is a break from tradition for Trump. But I think overall, there's a feeling in the United States that Trump does transactional, theatrical displays. They give you a quick media burst, but how sustainable are the long-term relationships?
Yeah, interesting, John, though. I mean, then from in the United States, do people feel, and I mean, your analysis personally, is this tariff and trade war, is it worth it? Will it be worth it? Is the U.S. really set to gain from kind of all the what many see as frustration and unpredictability?
Sure. It's going to be tough. In the short term, it's a winning strategy, especially for his base. Trump being tough. We've had enough of being exploited by other countries, though we're still the richest country in the world. But there's a sense of anger and resentment at the previous free trade agreements that essentially hollowed out the blue-collar working class in industrial manufacturing America. There's no immediate sense of price increases, but all the economists I speak to say that in a year's time, some of these tariffs, which is basically a tax on American consumers, will increase prices. And Trump was elected primarily on economic issues. And if prices start to go up with tariffs, the ideology of tariffs being good for America will be seriously questioned. So in the short to medium term, it's a winning strategy, tough on, foreign exploiters of American goodwill. That narrative will carry for a while. But once prices start to rise, there may well be a reevaluation in Trump's base.
Okay. And Ilongo, I mean, do you see this as I described it, kind of unpredictability, something that ASEAN countries are getting used to working with and will be able to profit from themselves? Or is it still, do they have to, by default, be on the losing end of Trump's new policies?
Well, not necessarily to be on the losing end, but as I said, there are, well, first of all, I mean, this agreement certainly strengthens the American hand as we see it. And on the same score, it reduces ASEAN's competitiveness, at least the four countries which are involved. But then again, there are exemptions that they need to, work out with the US. So that's a second set of discussion that has to be undertaken by by the countries which are involved. So I think the story is just beginning. We are, it's far too early in the day to say that, who is the winner and who is actually losing. The opportunities are there, in my opinion, but, the text is voluminous. We have to really look into the details as well.
Yeah. Isun, let me switch to another theme with you. And as you know, it started out with a lot of fanfare in the media about the Thai-Cambodia peace deal. Tell us what that amounted to at the summit itself. Do Asians in general feel like real change, real progress was made, that this is truly a broker that can change confrontational dynamics in Southeast Asia?
Well, number one, I think the recent skirmishes between Thailand and Cambodia, that's really an exception, an outlier of an otherwise rather harmonious ASEAN. You see the two countries from time to time over some religious facilities on their borders. They might have run-ins with one another, and this time it's a little bit more serious. So I don't foresee sort of escalation of this particular set of conflicts between these two neighboring countries. But what is perhaps worrying for a number of ASEAN countries will be, number one, the situation in Myanmar, because number one, Myanmar is a full member of ASEAN, and of course we would like to see our fellow members being prosperous, being well-to-do, stable, politically, economically, and so on. And number two, of course, it could also mean refugees flooding to the rest of Southeast Asia. So that, I think, it's a point of concern. The other thing is, of course, as was mentioned before, the tensions on South China Seas, especially between China on the one hand and Philippines on the other hand, with Philippines being the next rotating chairman of ASEAN next year.
So, Isun, do you, in hindsight then, wish that the United States at this summit had played a more prominent role in talking about those issues rather than perhaps looking for an easier win with the Thailand-Cambodia, skirmish that we saw? Would it have been more important for the U.S. to take a better position on South China Sea and other issues that better represent ASEAN interests?
Well, I think the United States has very clear positions on South China Seas, namely the freedom of navigations. It's essentially open and high sea and so on. But the problem lies with ASEAN's decision-making mechanism, whereby you need consensus in order to reach certain decisions. And while the more affected ASEAN countries, they would prefer perhaps a slightly stronger response from ASEAN, there are other countries within ASEAN who are not of that persuasion, and therefore it's very difficult to take, shall we say, a concerted decision on the South China Sea conflicts, with or without U.S. help and U.S. assistance. Because these countries, they just have different positions. The United States, of course, for this part of the world, it means number one, security and defense, and number two, of course, also the purveyor of various high-tech products and so on. So, well, let's see whether Trump would be successful in I mean, the U.S. is selling to Malaysia some aircraft, but let's see whether there will be purchases of other military equipments from this part of the world, American equipments.
John, then let me come back to you, because, I mean, as the United States is took this prominent role at the ASEAN summit, is now doing this Asia tour and looking at sometimes very far off issues for the U.S. public and really working hard on those. We have to remember that domestically, Trump has now cut trade talks with Canada. He even, he demolished part of the White House to build a ballroom via these private funders. The Epstein files are still looming and being talked about. National troops even deployed in U.S. cities. I mean, are Americans appreciating his paying attention to what's happening much further abroad to the point that we can expect this kind of role from the U.S. in the future in Asia and elsewhere?
I think there's a distinctively Trumpian sort of policy, which is he's looking for easy wins so that he can ratchet up his kind of list of conflicts avoided because of his personal intervention, all in pursuit of a Nobel Prize, Peace Prize. He's infatuated by this Peace Prize because Obama won it. Or was awarded it, and so it's driven him crazy. So he's a lot of these things are, again, sort of theatrical or sort of slightly inflated narratives of his role. India, Pakistan, for example. It was more substantive role in, Gaza, for example, because the US has effectively more leverage with Israel, rarely used, but more recently effectively used. I think the Thailand, Cambodia, I'd agree with previous one. It's a kind of a relatively minor skirmish in the scheme of things. But Trump sees as an opportunity for a sort of moving in, solving the world's problems. That's another reason why he should be given the Peace Prize.
Yeah.
So I think I don't think either Thailand or Cambodia will gain much from it because Trump's not a peacemaker as such.
Right, but for the sake of Asian counterparts and the trade relationship, can they benefit from his? I get you called it almost an obsession with trying to broker peace, trying to be more involved in these. Is it good for everyone? Again, is that a win, or is it taking the focus away too much to a point that it might backfire among his domestic audience?
I think it's kind of diversionary. I think you're correct in that. There's a lot of issues at home. You mentioned some of them, Epstein files in particular, rising inflation, a sense of the crackdown on ICE in cities in America is becoming slightly more disturbing for the middle 40% who are neither against or for Trump. And so these foreign interventions are cost-free. America's not going to send troops for Thailand, Cambodia. It's not that important. But it gives an easy victory. There was a phrase from Shakespeare, I think it's Henry V, that said, busy giddy minds with foreign interventions.
Okay. All right. Let me just move it forward because now we have Trump going to Japan. So let me ask Ilongo and Isun. Ilongo, I'll start with you. What about Japan now, whom some see, especially under this new conservative leadership, as a potential growing competitor to and a bulwark kind of against China? Is that how people are reading the dynamic from Southeast Asia?
I think from the American perspective, the framing of the visit looks like, there's a win for America because the ASEAN member countries seem to have sort of, worked hand in hand with American side. So I think it's an attempt by America, I think, just to push the thing further with an allied country to show that that America has its own. Its presence in this part of the world, East Asia, is not diminished or is being challenged by China. And I think that's the reason why, or rather, I think that is the signal that he intends to signal by going to Japan.
Okay. Unfortunately, it seems we're having some audio issues with Ilongo's line. Quickly, let me ask that question, though, to Isun as well. Where do you see the U.S. relationship with Japan now going, especially under this new conservative leadership? I mean, if I'm not mistaken, she calls herself the Iron Lady of Japan to be.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of us, both in the region as well as in the U.S., are looking very positively of Japan having her first female prime minister and a self-styled Iron Lady, no less. And that's because, or at least for this part of the world, Japan is a very important trading partner, a main source of investments. But unfortunately, after Shinzo Abe, you have, if I recall, let's say three prime ministers, two of whom the name I think not many of us could recall. I mean, the first and the third one after Shinzo. The second one is called Kishida, with slightly a bit of energy and force. So we hoped, of course, this new prime minister could sort of, shall we say, revive a rather lethargic Japan, especially in terms of Japan's economy. And if Japan's economy could be revitalized, then indeed it could do more business with this part of the world, namely Southeast Asia.
Okay, Oh Yi-sun, that will have to be the final word for this edition of the Newsmakers. We are unfortunately completely out of time. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists so much for being with us and our viewers for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.